morning. What a great start, huh? And I want it to be a great finish for everyone. And if you happen to own a green Jeep, an older Jeep, your lights happen to be on, and I'd like you to be happy when you get done today and not stuck out in the snowstorm. So you can just kind of quietly slip out if you think you have a green older Jeep that might have its lights on. Hey, welcome today. We are kicking off a brand new message series called Dancing with the Law. And I don't know what image comes to your mind when you think about dancing with the law. We were kind of talking about as a staff, and the thing that popped out in my mind, it was the idea of sort of the celebration of the law, of embracing it and dancing. And in fact, if you know, if you're Jewish or you know anybody sort of that has that background, in the fall of every year, in Jewish synagogues all around the world on a Friday evening, they actually have this great celebration. It's called Simchat Torah. And it's literally a celebration to dance with the law. What's happened is they've read through the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, that's the section they call the Torah. And so at that time of the year, they come to the very last. They've unrolled the scroll and gotten to the last page of the scroll. And before going back to the start, they on that evening celebrate. They take it out of the big box, the big sacred box that's up in a synagogue, and they literally put it on shoulders and they dance. And everybody gets to dance with the law. And it's this great celebration, this great enjoyment, this great engagement with the law. And that's the picture I have in my mind when I was thinking about this. But around the staff, the message that came back when they think about dancing with the law was this idea of how we dance around the law. In fact, I was having a conversation with a friend this week. We were driving someplace and talking about lots of different stuff. And somehow we got in a conversation of speeding. You know, we were actually on the Beltway, and, you know, the speeding and how that all works. And he said, well, you know, he says, I never speed. He says, if we get, you know, the tickets show up at my house, he says, I open them up. I look and see, you know, where they were at, what they were happening. And I say, oh, that was my wife, that was my wife, that was my wife. That was my son. Then he had a few that he thought, well, that's weird. Looks like me, but I never speed. So he goes to the court, and he goes to the honor, you know, the judge. And he says, you know, judge, these are my wives, these are my sons. You know, these 3 here that are here, I don't know what the story is. I don't speed. To which the judge says, well, let's look at these case by case. This one, he says, no, I wasn't around that era. Next one, no, I wasn't. Third one, well, yeah, that one's my fault. I was driving along and I actually saw the light flash, and that one's my fault. But trust me, I never speed. And I started laughing because I said, isn't that how we all kind of look at it? I never do this except when I do that, but that doesn't mean I do that because I don't ever do that. And what would it take for us to no longer dance around the law, but like our Jewish brothers and sisters, to embrace it, to dance with the law, to celebrate the law in our lives versus yeah, I know, but how can I kind of work around? What would it be like for us to have an exclamation like throughout Psalms 119? I picked just one of the times, but multiple times through that 119th Psalm, a really long psalm, this long song, where it says this: let your mercy, God, let your compassion come on me so that I may live. I delight in your laws. What would it take for us to be able to engage with that, to have that kind of experience so that we're dancing with the law as this great kind of guide for life versus it's there and I'm here and I'm not so sure how this all works out, how this all ought to take place. And so, if this is the only time you're here with us, I want you to know what this whole series is about. And here's what the series is about. The 10 Commandments aren't prerequisites for a relationship with God. I want you to write that down, right? That's important. The 10 Commandments are not prerequisites for a relationship with God. In fact, they are proof a relationship already exists. And I'm going to show you that today by going to the story that oftentimes is used as backup to the idea, well, no, we got to kind of keep the law. I mean, there is this thing that kind of goes around, this common belief that says this, that you and I find acceptance with God through our behavior. You ever felt like that? Ever kind of heard that idea? I mean, you can talk to somebody on the street, somebody who claims no religious, but said, hey, if there is a God and, you know, die, where are you going to end up? How are you going to know? And it's normally like, well, I hope I've done enough good things in life to have them smile at me. I hope I've done enough to let them, to kind of let me in on this thing. And so often that belief seeps into so many different areas of our lives. And we get this idea that our relationship with God is based on how we respond, what we do, how we behave. In fact, in order to get him to respond to us, we need to get our act together. There's some of you sitting here this morning that may be back in church for the very first time in a long time. Maybe you're watching online, or you got some friends that you know, and you know, this idea kind of goes around. I really would like to start going back to church, but, you know, for some of us it's a really big but, you know, but I got this going on, and I really need to stop that, and I really ought to start doing this, and we have all these things, and it's this kind of idea that I need to get my act together in order to go to this place to meet God, so that when I get there, God will go, hey, I know you. You're doing so much better. I'm glad if you showed up a couple weeks ago, I'm not so sure you would have been okay, but you're starting on the right track, and because you're on the right track, I'm going to meet you halfway and pull you along. And we get this idea that says I have to be better in order for God to answer my prayers, in order for God to fix my relationship and to help me break some addictions, all that kind of stuff. I got to show him, I got to prove to him that I'm worthy of his acceptance. When in fact, the story that we're going to look at today actually shows the opposite of that, but it's the story that is oftentimes, look, it's this idea that God shows up on this mountain one day with Moses, his guy, and says, Moses, I'm not going to give you all 613 to take down the people. That's too big of a thing. I just want you to take down these two big stone things that have only 10 commandments on it. That's all I'm asking, 10 commandments. And for a lot of people, it's like, okay, 10. Let me see how many I can remember, you know. And it kind of goes to this list of how am I doing? And thou shalt not murder. Never murdered anybody. That's a big check for me on the good side. You know, we're starting off good. Then I see another one is thou shalt not steal. I haven't done a lot of that in my life. Haven't committed adultery. Haven't been unfaithful to my wife. That's all good. Of course, then Jesus goes and expands it and says, you know, if you even thought about it, it's like you've done it. It's like, oh, man, well, never mind. I mean, it doesn't quite seem fair, does it? Just thinking about it, you know? And you go through those, and Jesus, especially Jesus' expansions. And what is it? Is God come down and said, here are the 10. Do these 10, and that means you're in. But if you don't do the 10, you're out. And by the way, it's not just, I haven't murdered anybody, I haven't stolen in a very small kind of view, I haven't done this and that. When you get Jesus' expansion, what do you do with that? It's almost like God would be setting us up to fail. How could that be? How do we respond? How do we figure that all out? Well, that's where we're going today. But knowing again, and I'm going to show you in just a moment, but if you don't get anything else today or any through the rest of the series, you're kind of out traveling or whatever, just remember this. Keeping the law, dancing with the law, embracing the law is not a prerequisite to relationship with God. It is simply proof. It is an evidence that you are in a relationship with God. And we're going to go there in just a moment over to Exodus chapter 3. But before we go there, I want to invite you just to bow your heads and let's pray one more time together, all right? Lord, we oftentimes stop and look at our lives. And we compare ourselves to what we kind of believe you want out of us, what you expect, what you commanded us. And when we're honest, we know that not only can't we live up, we don't ever live up. And what do you do when you've already broken something, even before you knew or after you knew, and how do we make sense out of that? And sometimes we're worried that our failures keep us away from you, keep us from having that relationship. And I would just ask today that these words that record something that happened over 3,000 years ago would be just as fresh and as important to us today. To know your desire and your heart towards us. So speak to us now in your name. Amen. Exodus is this great book of the Bible. This is more of a section of the Bible, we would call it. And it's the story of the Exodus, this group that of the children of Israel are in Egypt, and they're taken out of Egypt, and they go to the promised land. Most of us are familiar with the story. But did you know that before Exodus, before this whole story, there was no nation of Israel? In fact, their whole history, if a little Jewish kid was sitting in history class one day, during this time, you know what their history would be? You have been a slave. They have been a slave for 400 years. That's a long time, isn't it? That's longer than the U.S. has been in existence. How would you like it if all of us today, not only were some of our ancestors slaves, we're slaves today, and we have been slaves, my mom and my dad and my grandparents and my great-grandparents, you start going back, I mean, as long as we can remember, as long as we've been sort of here, we have been slaves. That's our story. And so it's to this group of people. In fact, when they go to Egypt, they're not a nation yet. They're just a big family. If you remember the story, God, a long time ago, makes this promise to Abraham and says, through you, something special is going to happen. You're going to end up blessing the whole world. And if you remember the story, Abraham and his wife Sarah are pretty old at that time, and they kind of laugh about it, kind of think, I don't know what God's doing, but he's a little out on the limb here, but okay, we'll kind of trust. And all of a sudden they have this child in their old age, and there's some other stuff that goes on, but they got Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and Jacob has these families and these kids, and they're the ones that end up going to Egypt. And when they're in Egypt, everything's fine for a while. But they keep getting bigger. And as the group gets bigger, it goes from being just a family to a really big family to a really large family. To all of us, there's enough of them, they say that's kind of a nation. And Egypt figures this is not a good thing to have a nation sort of growing within your nation, so they put them in slavery. And for their whole life, that's the thing. And so for 400 years, they have been in slavery. And I'm going to ask you a very important question. In slavery, do you have to have any rules and laws you live by? Really, you only have to have one rule and one law, right? You do what the boss, the master, your owner says, right? They say, do this, you do it, right? They say, don't do that, you don't do it. That's all you have. You don't have to have any laws. You just say, what do you want me to do, master, today? Okay, I go do it. Everything is fine. And it's in this setting that God comes after 400 years, that God shows up to this guy named Moses. And here's what he says. Moses is out. He's had his own life. He's gone from a really, what a lot of people would say, a great life to a really bad life. He's out, moving sheep around now. And here's what happens. God meets him and says, Moses, you're 80 years old, and I've got a job for you. And here, Moses, I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt. And I have to wonder when Moses hears God say these words to him, that he goes, your people? When did we become your people? You haven't been around for 400 years, and all of a sudden we're your people. And more than that, your people implies something. It implies a connection, a relationship. Most people don't have any idea who you are. I mean, there's some stories, but they're just some stories. 400 years, we have been working 7 days a week. We don't have time to really think for ourselves. We don't have time to do much else than just produce. And now you show up and you say you've heard their misery. And I've heard them crying out because they're slave drivers. That something has gone on, and God says, I see this, and these are my people. I'm taking ownership of them, responsibility for them. And he says, now I know how much they're suffering, and I have come to rescue them, from the power of the Egyptians, and to bring them from that land to a good land with plenty of room for everyone. Out of nowhere, God shows up to this guy and says, Moses, ta-da, I'm here. And I have heard my people. These are my people. And Moses could have said, well, what do you mean we're your people? We don't know you. What's your name, by the way? What should I tell them? And we haven't done anything. We have not done anything to make us your people. To which God said, you're exactly right. You haven't. But you are my people. These are my people. In fact, we go a few chapters later, chapter 12. 3 months before we get to Mount Sinai, and they're handing down the laws, these rules that we've looked at to live by, 3 months before that, God shows up again. And this has been going on, and God sends Moses to Pharaoh, the ruler of all the Egyptians, and says, go tell Pharaoh, you heard this story before, right? Let my people go. And Pharaoh says, and Moses says, let my people go. And Pharaoh says, and over, right? And you remember the story? And Moses says, well, you really need to, and things are not going to go well, and here's what happens. You start, you worship all these things, and so they worship the river, and so the Nile, and so the Nile turns to blood. And Moses says, let my people go, and Pharaoh says, right? And he goes down the list, all these things that they sort of worship. Frogs, which, by the way, I'm not sure why you worship frogs, but they worship frogs. Get frogs all over the place, right? They worship the sun, blots out the sun. They keep going through this long, long list over and over and over and over. All these bad things begin to happen. Moses keeps going back and saying, will you let us go now? No. Will you let us go now? No. And finally they get to this moment that all these other things have happened. It's kind of the final big piece. And God speaks, and he gives us following instructions to Moses and Aaron while they're still there in Egypt. And here's what he says. From now on, this month will be the first month of the year for you. From now on, since you're my people, we have a brand new calendar. To be my people, you got a brand new start. So today, now on, this is the first month for you. And announce to the whole community that on the 10th day of this month, each family must choose a lamb or young goat for a sacrifice. So just tell everybody on the 10th day, go out and get yourself a little lamb, a little goat, and we're going to do something. And he says, if a family's too small to eat an entire lamb, let them share the lamb with another family in the neighborhood. I love this part of the story. It doesn't just go get a lamb, kill it. And we kind of think, ooh, but that's normal. I mean, that's what you did. If you wanted to eat meat, you killed an animal to eat the meat. So this wasn't the kind of ooh kind of thing. That wasn't anything special. It was just the idea that, get either a small lamb, or if you got not enough people in your family, go invite some other people. Don't want any leftovers. Just, we don't want to waste anything. But get this, share it. And there's something that happens. They're supposed to take some of the blood of the lamb's blood and smear it on top and on the sides of the door frame of the house where the lamb will be eaten. So this is where it kind of gets weird. And this is the command. This is the strange thing out of this. This is the one commandment this is the very first commandment that God gives to his people. To eat a meal. And don't get too much food, or if you get too much food, invite some other people with you. That's the command. The strange part of it, the trust part they had to do, was to take some of that lamb's blood, and smear it around the door frame of their home. And on the night, he says, there's a reason for this. On the night, I'm going to pass through the land of Egypt and kill all the firstborn sons and firstborn male animals in the land of Egypt. Tonight, things are going to get really bad around here. Because firstborn males, sons, firstborn male animals, take away the chance to reproduce, take away their birthright, take away their hopes. All that's going to happen tonight. It's going to happen tonight. So that's why you get this lamb, you eat this lamb, you share the lamb, you put some blood around, and you just kind of have this meal. And I will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt, for I am the Lord. And then he says these words that maybe you have heard before. The blood you have smeared on the doorpost will serve as a sign. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. That's where the term Passover comes from. He will pass over you. The plague of death will not touch you when I strike the land of Egypt. Out of nowhere. The very first commandment God gives his people, get a lamb, little goat, have a meal. Take some of the blood, put it around your doorpost. Trust me on this. The very first command was to eat a meal and to trust me. To trust me. And if you remember the story, they trust him. God comes in and all these firstborn males, these firstborn animals and sons. I mean, there's weeping, there's crying. Everybody, there's this wail that goes out in Egypt. Moses goes back to Pharaoh and says, and Pharaoh says, yeah, this time he says yes, yeah. He says, just get out of my sight. His son has died. His family, everybody's died. He's in mourning. Just get out. Of course, he kind of goes through a thought process because he says, well, this is kind of our economy. I lose the slaves. Our economy tanks, and so we can't have. That's what he's been fighting this whole time. But now it is too much. He says, go, and they leave. And of course, then the Egyptians chase them. They go through the Red Sea, the water, all that stuff. You've been to Disneyland or Disney World. You've seen the story, right? 3 months later, they're on top of this mountain, Moses and God. 3 months later, as they stand there, they're reminded again throughout the whole story. When God shows up the first time and says, this is my people. When he stands there and tells them, get this meal, that they're my people. when he stands here on the mountain, he's ready to say this. He reminds them of this one important thing. We are saved by works. And that's the story that has always been true and will always be true. We are saved by works. They're just not our works. They weren't the works then. God was the one that showed up and said, these are my people. And they said, what do you mean you're a people? We haven't done anything to be your people. You're my people. God chose them because, you know why he chose them? Because he chose them. It's not a hard thing. He chose them because he chose them. And that is the way it's always been. And so he chooses them and says, all right, you're my people. Now, here's what I want you to do. First test, eat a meal. Don't get too big of a lamb so you can't, you don't have leftovers. No leftovers tonight, just eat the lamb. Share it. Put some blood. That's your step. That's your faith. That showing that, you understand what's going on. But it's a sign that we're already in a relationship. Then Moses is standing at the mountain, top of Mount Sinai with God. And God begins this discussion with him. And he says to him, Moses, tell the people, I am the Lord, your God. I am the Lord, your God. Now remember, up to this point, no commandments, no rules. These are people that have been slaves. All they know is, my master said do this, that's what I do. If I don't do that, I get in trouble. They don't have anything. And at this moment, God says, tell them, tell my people, I'm your God. I'm the one that brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Remind them of that again. Because that's important. That's important because they were his before they did anything. And then he says these words. You shall have no other gods beside me. To which I wonder if Moses went, well, duh. I mean, after all the stuff they'd just been through, I didn't go into long detail today. You can go home and read it in your Bible in Exodus, or wait till around Easter time. The Ten Commandments comes on movie every year. Charlton Heston, let my people go. They had all the plagues and all this. You can see it then. All this. Crazy stuff happens. And I have to imagine Moses is like, well, duh. All the stuff that you've done. You've called us your people. You've rescued us. You've brought us out of 400 years of slavery. Well, that's all we know is slavery. Now we're out. What other God will we follow? Why would we choose any other God, right? With all the stuff that you've already done, that you've done for us, in claiming us, in taking us, in rescuing us, who else would we go to? Who else would we think about? See, rules never establish a relationship with God. Never. Rules always define a relationship with God. See, when my boys were growing up, I had rules for them. Any other parents here? You have rules for your kids, right? Amen. Yeah, amen, that's right. Sometimes a long list of rules. Straighten you guys out, keep them straight there, Do all the jobs that mom and dad don't want to do, That's why we have kids. But we had rules in my family for our boys. But you know what? I did not have any rules for my neighbor's kids. Do you know why? Weren't my kids. I didn't call over in the afternoon and said, by the way, little Timmy, did you do your homework today? I didn't care if he did his homework. Well, I cared, but not really. It's weren't my kids, right? I had rules for my kids, but I had rules for my kids because they were They weren't my kids because they kept my rules. They had my rules because they were my kids. Get it? And so often we get that all around. We think it's about, if I keep the rules, then I get in. And God has it all. Throughout that story, he comes to them and says, tell my people, I have seen what they've been going through. For 400 years, I have watched it. And I see it's gotten too much, and now I got to do something for my people. Go tell my people, get this lamb. Brand new calendar, we're starting today. Get a lamb, share it, eat it, put some blood around the stuff. That's the weird part. That's the faith part. But the rest of it, trust me on this. They go out. 3 months later, God says to them, listen, tell them again, I'm your God. Your God. There's a relationship here. Even though you haven't done anything to make that connection of a relationship. Relationship always precedes rules with God. You're his children. Then he can give you rules. If you're not his children, he has no right giving you rules. Just like I didn't have any right. Much as I griped about the kids down the street who left their bicycles out all the time, I didn't have any right to go down to them and say, get these bicycles inside. Now, if I saw one of my boys' bicycles down there, I had every right to say, get that bicycle back there, and we're going to talk, that whole tough stuff that we do, Sam, I want to look tough, See, God's number one rule was and is and will always be simply, will you trust me? Will you trust me? Will you trust me when I say that you're my child? That I'm your God? Will you trust me? When I say, these are some rules, but these rules aren't what get you in. They aren't even what keep you in. They're rules just to help guide your life, to help your life be better and let the lives of people around you be better. I mean, think about it for a second. Wouldn't our life be better if there was no murder? I hope I said yes, right? Wouldn't our lives be better if there was no stealing? Either us taking stuff from others or others taking our stuff. And we can go down the whole long list of stealing. We could start at the government and go on down. I mean, you go down through the whole long list. Wouldn't it be great if we didn't covet? Nobody coveted other people's stuff. That what I had, we kind of shared, no big deal. You want to take it? It's no big deal. But somehow we have got this all scrunched up and wound about. And we forget something very important. How many of you own a dog? How many of you are glad you do not own a dog? My wife raised her hand. We used to own a dog. Dumbest thing we ever did. Great dog, by the way. Lousy owners. We got the dog because our boys wanted a dog. And of course, the pleas that go along with that, right? They say stuff like, Caesar, they say stuff like, oh, please, 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 please. I will take care of that dog. I will walk the dog. I will feed the dog. I will clean up the dog's poop. If you don't have a dog yet and your child comes to you and tells you those things, trust me, they will do none of the above. Oh, they'll start off that way, but pretty quick, the dog's out in the backyard going, looking in the window, and the kids are playing the video games, they're running around, the dog's out there, ooh, somebody please, and bad thing. But let's go back to the dog side. If you have a dog, or you can imagine having a dog, whose dog do you keep in your yard? Your dog, right? You don't put other people's dogs in your yard. I mean, if it's lost, you might, but you don't go down the street and say, I'm grabbing that dog, put it in my yard, right? You put your dog in the yard. Does putting a dog in your yard make it your dog? No, it doesn't make it your dog, It isn't like dogs in my yard. My dog gets out, not my dog anymore, Neighbor down the street can call up and say, hey, I got your dog down here, not my dog. Because it's not in my yard, right? What is it that makes that dog your dog? It's not the yard, is it? It's not the rules. It's not the boundaries. It's not, the invisible yard. Anybody ever had one of those invisible yards? We tried it for a while. It did not work. It's a great concept, I kind of wonder sometimes if it would be great to have it for us as followers of Jesus. Kind of invisible fence, all the thou shalt, you don't have to remember them, you just walk. Oh, man, I'm not going to do that again. Brian's over here saying, hey, come on over, Mike. No, that's okay. I am all good because, what I mean? It would be great, but that's outside. But you know what makes your dog, right? You either went and purchased that dog, picked out that dog, brought that dog home. You did one of those three things, and all of a sudden, you know what? You are a dog owner. Now you got to clean up after that thing, right? Got to feed that. But it's not the fence that makes it your dog. It's not only when it's in the fence it's your dog. It is you have a fence for your dog's sake, right? Because you don't want him running up down the street. You don't want coming home, if you got kids coming home and Every night coming home and having the kids go, Daddy, the dog's gone, Spot's gone, oh, go find Spot. You're like, come on. He's smart enough. If he's smart enough to get out, he's smart enough to get home. Can't be. My point is simply this. God has given us rules and laws and commands because he loves us. That's what they're there for. Not for us to prove something to him. It's not a way to get in with him. It's not a requirement to say, I got to do these things and then I'm in. God has said, I love you. That's why I've given you these things. That is the story that comes from Exodus. And somehow, somewhere, we have heard that story, taken that story, and made it, no. It is about thou shalt and thou shalt not. And thought those are the defining markers. And if I do, I'm in. And if I don't, I'm out. And we've all tried to do. And at times, even when we're doing, it doesn't work out quite well. And so are we in, are we out? And it's a reminder again that in that story, over and over, we see God saying, these are my people. Through no choice, no response, no anything on their own. And you might be sitting here today, and maybe you have resisted this whole idea of God because you look at your life and say, you know what, I'm just not doing enough. And when I get to the stage, when I kind of get my life together, then I'm gonna move with God. I'll start going back to church. I'll start doing this and that. And I want you to hear very clearly from me today, but more importantly from God's word today, that your relationship with God, your connection with God is not based on what you're doing or what you need to do. Your connection with God is based on the fact that somebody already did something for you. Jesus has done something for you. And that's the story of those of us that are Christians. I mean, the reality is, you will hardly find any Christian that will tell you they have had a major life change because of guilt. Because we all know how powerful guilt is for very short term, but over the long course of things, guilt's not a great motivator. We think it is, but it's not. How many of you, your mother still tries to guilt you into calling her every week? And you don't. Right? I mean, we can do stuff we feel guilty of, and we just keep doing it, We feel bad about it, but not so bad, right? But you can talk to a lot of people, and very few of them will make huge life changes because of guilt. But there are a lot of Christians, a lot of followers of Jesus that will tell you about incredible life changes who have done it because of gratitude. That God has come into their life and done something for them, changed something in their life, accepted them. And it's from that gratitude of saying, God, I don't understand this and it doesn't make sense. But in spite of it not making sense, I'm thankful for it. And because I'm thankful for it, I just want to respond. I just want to, I want to move in your direction versus moving in my direction. But it always happens as a sense of gratitude, not a sense of I got to get it and do it. Not a sense of guilt. So this afternoon, still this morning, I hope you'll rethink what God's laws are about, what his commands are about. And I hope you let the truth that God invites you to be his child, to be one of his people, one of his followers, not because of anything you've done, because of what he's done and what he offers through all that. With that in mind, I invite you to take out that Connect card that Pastor Jason talked about at the start of our day. And on it, there's a number of next steps. And each week, we like to kind of give people a chance to take another step. And so here's some options today. Maybe your next step today is simply to rethink how you see God's law, how you see his 10 Commandments. Maybe your next step today is to begin to live them as an active relationship, not as a step to having that relationship. To change how you see those things. Maybe your next step today is simply to trust God. to recognize that that's really the one simple rule that is behind all these things. God's question, God's appeal to all of us. Will you trust me?